Suzie Bates. You have played every edition of the T20 World Cup and you are finally a World Cup winner. How does it feel?
Surreal, but so good to get the World Cup title. It's what you play for in every World Cup.
Suzie Bates, New Zealand women's cricketer, 177 women's T20Is, most runs in the history of women's T20 internationals, 171 women's one-day internationals, second most hundreds in women's one-day internationals with 13, and the third highest runs of all time. She's already a legend of the game, and she's still going. Suzie joined the Elly's Batting Mentality podcast to talk about the one shot she learned in backyard cricket that kick-started her international career, her love of scoring hundreds, the technical change that helped her win Player of the Tournament at the 2013 Cricket World Cup, her mental routine, and how she's learned the hard way about being too rigid with it, her career highlight, and 3 tips for aspiring batsmen and women. We started the interview by talking about our favourite coach, Mike Shrimpton.
He did it kind of in an informal manner, so even though I thought he was tactically teaching me cricket, now looking back, he was covering all the mental things without me even realising it. So, yeah, I still have emails that he used to send that sometimes I have to go back to because, yeah, I felt like there was a period with my cricket that there was a bit of a hole and a gap for just someone that understood my game inside out, and you could, flick an email or a message. So, yeah, I'd like to go back to those emails because, yeah, he was the biggest influence on my cricket career in terms of just my batting. So it's cool that we've got that connection because I feel like I haven't talked about him in a while because it's been a few years and the players that knew him that I played with have kind of moved on as well. So no one really knows the shrimp influence.
Absolutely. I never got to Napier. I only spent time with him in Christchurch. He's, like you're saying, it's good to talk about him, try and keep him alive as much as we can, right? Because as you say, the influence he's had over numerous players has been significant. So I'm sure he's looking on from up there and enjoying what you're producing. So right, I'll get into the first one. So having a couple of brothers to play with in the backyard growing up must have in some way accelerated your development as a young player. So what are those BYC memories that you have?
Yeah, early days we lived in McAndrew Bay, which we had a big field. Well, it felt big at the time, so we had a bit more of an oval to play on, and if you hit it over the fence, it was 6 and out. But then we moved into town when I was about 8 into like a townhouse, so there was only really a little concrete alleyway that we could fit the length of a wicket in, and my memories are of my oldest brother Tom just batting for hours and hours and me running into bowl. Henry would wicket keep for a bit but get bored and like I wouldn't get a bat till I got him out. So that was a little bit frustrating, and then probably why early on in my career I just, was in for a good time, not a long time, because that's what I was used to in backyard cricket. But I was actually telling the coach here about this the other day, is it was kind of like the wall of the house. So if you hit it in front of point, it hit the house and came straight back. So it wasn't really any runs. But if you played it late behind the house, it was like late cut for 4. And I think that shot for the first 10 years of my career probably scored me 70 to 80% of my runs, cutting off the stumps. It didn't matter what line or length it was. But that's kind of my memories, is just in the backyard, whatever that looked like, getting out there with my brothers and then often their friends at barbecues and things, having the confidence to join in with the older boys, not just my brothers, and trying to, I guess, prove myself and show that I could compete. So, yeah, I definitely think being out of my comfort zone in terms of that and just having cricket around me, whether it was on the TV or out in the backyard, just, I guess, grew my love for the game quite early on.
Brilliant. I guess I listened to your interview with Brodie Kane on Kiwi Yarns just before this, just to just to see what types of questions had been asked before. And obviously, she touched on your career in basketball, but I guess the question I wanted to go through with you was, when did you realize it was cricket for you, and what was key to your decision in moving towards cricket?
Yeah, I feel really lucky in a way, just the timing of my career. I didn't have to choose too early, and I loved all sport. And it is something now I see with younger players signing contracts, having to make that decision maybe before they're ready. And yeah, it was probably when I was 24 that I fully committed to cricket. And that was a little bit around the coach, Gary Stead, at the time, asked me to captain. So I felt like with my basketball and the captaincy, I kind of couldn't do both and I needed to be all in. So it was partly that, but also I remember a chat with Steve Jenkin, who was the coach before Gary, kind of saying to me, like, you could be the best player in the world if you put all your eggs into one basket. It wasn't like pressure to say stop playing basketball. He was like, you don't realize how good you could be if you gave it everything. And I think I had done both and sort of never quite fully committed to either. And in a good way, they both helped each other because I got away from both games and my fitness was improved for my cricket through basketball and vice versa. But yeah, it wasn't until I was 24 that I think I was like, right, cricket is my number one priority. So that comes first. And if I can play basketball around that, then I can. And yeah, so that was a bit later than I guess players, and in the male game growing up, contracts were around, but in the female game, they've only been a recent thing. And I know a lot of players that are good football players or hockey players, but had to kind of give that away early on. So although I wasn't paid, I feel really lucky that I could do both and figure out what I guess my true passion was when I was a bit older.
Awesome. You've touched on Shrimpo, who was probably, from what I can understand anyway about your career, he was probably, a big influence for you post your international cricket debut. But if there was, pre-international cricket career, was there a big influence on your batting?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and I don't have a coach that I remember significantly impacting. I was really lucky to have Mike Hesson when I was like in the Otago under 17s and going through the Sparks age group. But I actually think the biggest influence were two players that were older and played in the White Ferns at the time, Sarah Sukigawa and Paula Flannery, mainly because I just, it was such an amateur setup. So you trained maybe once or twice a week and played. But because they played for New Zealand, they organised nets together and they'd invite me along and we'd do extra training and extra fielding. So yeah, without realising it at the time, those two sort of dragging me along to do extra training outside of team training and kind of showing me what it took at the next level was really influential. And then getting to play alongside them. And I don't remember the conversations, but I feel probably every game there was some lesson from those two. And yeah, they probably, before I made New Zealand, kind of showed me what White Ferns I guess were about and how much more you had to train just outside the domestic stuff.
So you made your ODI debut for the White Ferns as an 18-year-old. Which aspects of your game did you feel needed the most attention to give yourself the best chance of success as an international player?
Like everything. I was so naive, which in a funny way actually worked in my favour the first couple of years. Like I hadn't opened the batting at any level. In my second game for New Zealand, I went from batting 9 and being a bowler to opening the batting. And my role was to just let go of my long levers and take on the power play, which was quite forward thinking at that time in women's 50 over cricket. And I had a license and I liked to hit the ball down the ground, and it was literally as simple as that. And I pretty much relied on my hand-eye. I didn't think about the game. I remember I'd had a few early. I had like a 60 odd score in maybe my second or third game, so I felt a little bit confident, and then had a few quick fire 20s where I kept getting in and getting out. And then my first 100, I remember the coach just saying, let's just try and bat for 20 overs today. And so there was very little thinking. And I think the first couple of years, like I said, that helped me. But then the areas that I felt was my game awareness, my understanding of when I could take the game on and when I couldn't, playing spin when we went to India and playing their left arm spinner, who was one of the best in the world at the time. So yeah, my first couple of years, it was sort of a bit naive, and I got away with a bit of skill and had confidence from an early score. But then after that, when there was some failure, I realised there was a lot more work to do.
So was there a particular aspect, technical, tactical, mental within that space and that, post the first 2 year period where you feel like you got the biggest boost early on from?
I feel like early it was just having people around me that encouraged me to play my natural game, which was literally hitting down the ground. And they never really, I guess, made me overthink it. But then I think once they knew I was, I guess, ready for that phase, it was around, understanding how to build partnerships, that I could actually hit the ball on the ground for long periods of time in 50 over cricket, and hitting with the spin. I think as well, like I had a high grip, and so I really struggled actually playing off the back foot early on in my career. But in those days, a lot of the bowling was, I guess, full and straight with not much pace on it, so it actually suited. But as the game's developed and as females have become more athletic, there's a lot more pace on the ball, you're facing a heavier length, people are getting more revs on the ball, so the game has evolved so much since I first started, and I've had to be able to evolve with it. And having someone like Shrimpton teaching me all of that, when I couldn't sweep, he threw for hours at me around the wicket and just made me commit to sweeping every single ball, and just having people, I guess, around me teaching me what I needed to learn without, I guess, deep diving it too much myself. I just was really fortunate that I had those coaches. I didn't have to go searching too much because they were there, whereas I feel like as I've got older, I've almost probably searched more to find those answers.
Brilliant. And so you touched on your grip and having a high grip and how that was beneficial when the ball was full, but you said maybe it wasn't as suited when people started bowling heavier length and you had more back foot play. Did you end up changing your grip at all, or was it just a matter of getting more volume playing those back foot shots?
No, I ended up changing. I sort of had a really high grip, long levers, and I had almost a pinch bottom hand grip for a long period. And like I said, in that phase when a lot of the balls I was playing was off the front foot, like probably 80-90% deliveries you could play on the front foot, and that changed drastically as the game got more professional. So I sort of went to a lower grip for a period, and that was around the 2013 World Cup when we were in India and playing a lot of spin and sweeping. And then I've sort of gone to a slightly higher, and I've probably ended up smack bang in the middle now. Although with more T20, the bottom hand gets lower and lower. But I feel like I said this to the coach here the other day. When I have a break at the end of each season, sometimes how I pick that bat up in the first session, whatever feels right that year, is kind of what I go with.
Brilliant. I want to talk now about scoring hundreds. Now you've got 13 in your ODI career. If you think about, the player you were when you started your ODI career, that first series against Australia, what's changed tactically from the first in the first instance. What's changed tactically about your game that has allowed you to play those longer innings and score hundreds?
Yeah, it's probably just an understanding of conditions and being an opening batter. I guess having game plans for different conditions. I think early on, I just went out there and played the same way no matter what. And if it came off, it came off. And if it didn't, that was that. And now it's around, okay, how's this wicket going to play if the ball's swinging? What shots do I need to take out of my game? What areas do I need to look to hit in? If the pitch is doing a little bit. I guess we talk about going through the gears of like a car. So gear 1, playing everything straight, maybe leaving. Gear 2, maybe hitting more on the up, etc., etc. And so I think it's the understanding of what, I guess, gear I need to be in at that moment, given the opposition and the conditions. And yeah, I think that's come with age. It's come with playing in so many different conditions around the world, playing different bowlers, and being able to assess that quicker now than I was able to when I was younger. So yeah, I think that gives me a better chance to bat deeper into the innings. It's funny because I think like you said, I've scored 1,300s, but when you think that's out of 150 innings, I think you realise how difficult it is to score hundreds, and I feel like every game as an opening batter, I have an opportunity to score 100. So it's sort of like disappointing when you don't, which is a hard way to, I guess, live your cricketing career. But it's always the mindset I've had, even in 20-over cricket. By opening, I think you always have the opportunity to score hundreds. So every game, that's kind of my goal. And I haven't been able to do it as many times as I'd like, but there's a few in there.
I just want to go a little bit deeper into the hundreds idea, that that real desire to score hundreds. What's underneath that for you? Like, is it crossing 3 figures, you feel like you've done the job for your team? Is it, do you have any are you numbers focused? Are you statistically driven? What is underneath that for you?
Yeah, I think with Shrimpo, I became sort of numbers driven because he used that to drive me in terms of like trying to be the best in New Zealand, trying to be the best in the world, and stats obviously are big in cricket, and so that did drive me for a period of time. But also I just feel, and 100 is the statistical number, but as an opener, if you score big runs, I feel like more often than not the team that I'm in wins. So it's about winning cricket games and what those scores are. I guess 100's sort of the number that I try not to put too much focus on, but like that's in a one-day game opening. It's a very likely possibility if I bat as well as I can in that game. So I've gone away from numbers later on in my career, and it's more about the how I play each shot, and mentally how I felt out in the middle, and measuring it on that pretty much. And yeah, often the outcome when I have felt the way I wanted to feel mentally, the outcome often is the right one. So yeah, it is less about numbers. I think, you're always aware of those numbers as a batter, and sometimes just getting to 100, it's about chipping off 10 runs at a time and trying to get the next 10 and then the next 10 and resetting yourself. But yeah, I guess the crux of it is scoring enough runs that I put my team in a winning position, not a losing one. So
Absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah.
You've touched on it briefly, but was there ever a specific period in your career where, technique, you just thought about it and you thought, in certain conditions against a certain opposition, I need to make some real changes? Like, you've touched on the sweep. Were there any other aspects in your career, playing swing bowling? Was it playing spin, where you maybe were found wanting at times and then had to go back and sort of relook at your technique? And if so, how did you go about that?
Yeah, I feel like there's probably been two occasions that I remember really well. The sweeping, which we've touched on, I felt like once I got in against good spin bowlers and spinning conditions, that was a real work on my decision making around sweeping or using my feet. And so I worked pretty hard at that for one winter, which involved a lot of throwing from Shrimpton, who could also bowl decent leg spin, so that was helpful. But actually, the 2013 World Cup, where Shrimpton was an assistant coach, we played in India and they were 9 a.m. starts. And if you lost the toss, it was pretty overcast and dewy. And so the ball for the first 10 overs hooped around and then it completely flattened out. And it was the best time to bat if you got through the 10 overs, because by the second innings, it started to dry out and spin was difficult. So as an opener, I remember specifically talking to Shrimpo about just closing my face, so my outside edge, because I had an open face, so that my outside edge wasn't as exposed to the swinging ball. So for the first 10 overs, just closing the face and playing really within myself. So under my eyes, been willing to leave and kind of had a goal to get to that 10 overs. And I can't remember exactly, but I think that tournament I've scored 200 or 300 and I was named player of that tournament for that World Cup. And I just feel like the understanding and the trust I had in what he knew about the conditions and how to best play them. It's hard to find a coach that you have that much trust in, and then you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that, change my grip. And we just had long chats around how best to play those conditions. So that's one I remember. But then moving on from that, since 2020 cricket's become massive in the women's game, it's then been able to produce more power, being able to play reverse laps, laps behind the wicket and open up 360 degrees of the ground. But I feel like I spent so much time on behind the wicket that I actually lost my down the ground. So then you're not a 360 player because you've just reversed which end of the ground. So I feel like there's been so many times when I've had to adapt, had to try and evolve and go backwards to go forwards, which even at my age now, it's still trying to find the way as an opening batter in T20 cricket to produce more power, because that's where the game's going, and it's not getting too carried away and forgetting that my timing is my power too. So yeah, it's constantly learning and trying to evolve and keep up.
So if we can just go back to the sweep, when you talked about learning to play it, what were the keys from a technical perspective that you were working on?
Yeah, I've been massive on drills. I think, so often players go into nets and face bowlers and just net, whereas in the winter when I was indoors, there was just like hundreds of underarms, like underarm throws and perfecting, making sure that I was getting my head to the ball and that my hands were coming through at the right angle, and just staying on those drills until I got that right, and then moving perhaps to throws and then moving to bowling and kind of progressing the drill that way. And then once I sort of had done that, it was around what line and length that I was going to play the sweep to, not just, I guess, premeditating it. It was around, okay, this is the line that I want to play it in these conditions. This length I'm going to sweep because it's hard to use my feet. So it was around once I drilled it and was confident in the execution of being able to hit it either flat or a slog sweep, then it was around, I guess, decision making of line and length. And there's lots of drills of like sort of drawing grids on the indoor wickets and being able to go, yep, that line, that length, or that length I can't sweep, that line's too wide, etc., etc. So yeah, that took a lot of breaking the skill down to the real basics and doing lots of volume to then build it back up to the decision making.
And so where does hitting with or against the spin come into the sweep shot for you? Would you take it on in terms of, would you play both with the spin and against the spin if the line is right for you and the length is right?
Yeah, I feel it really depends. So actually, just last week we played in Blackpool, and the wicket was turning square, and Sophie Eccleston, one of England's best bowlers, was literally ragging it. And if I had to score, I would have like hard swept, but the situation of the game, we were within reach and we didn't really need to score off her. So I was just trying to play off the back foot and play with the spin. But had it been I needed to, I guess, get up and down the wicket or get boundaries, then yeah, I'm probably sweeping on line with the ball turning away from me. So line and length. If it gets too wide, I guess the sweep becomes higher risk with the top edge. So yeah, it is line and length, but it's also the situation of the game. It's not necessarily my strength. So if I can play off the back foot and score that way, then it's about assessing when I do need to play that. And then it is on line and length, especially if it's turning big. When New Zealand, you can get away with not having to worry too much about the spin and hitting with it. But yeah, I've played on a lot of wickets where I've played one shot against the spin and got out and pass that on to the next batter coming in, play with the spin.
I've actually just pulled up that scorecard batting against Sophie Eccleston that you've referred to. I see you guys were chasing 240 on, as you say, a rank Turner. Eccleston bowled 10 overs, 1 made and none for 17. So you denied her wickets. Was it, are there scenarios where you just say in these conditions, this particular bowler is their main threat? It's simply a matter of just finding a way to get through so that we can potentially attack better matchups.
Yeah, 100%. That was the plan, and we were nailing it probably until, I guess, the last 10 over. Like, we were needing fives, and we were, I guess, getting that down the other end, and I felt like seam was easier to hit, and they were going to come back on. So it was around denying her wicket, still trying to have some intent, but not taking any extra risk. And yeah, there is the balance of still wanting to score off their best bowler, so they can't just settle into a length. But on that day, the decision was to, deny her and score at the other end. And we got pretty close to doing that until we lost a few wickets. And it felt like it was going to be really hard for new batters coming in. So it was kind of taking responsibility once you got in on that wicket to not take any unnecessary risk.
And so you touched on wanting to play her off the back foot. So for those who aren't aware, left arm orthodox spinner, right?
Yeah.
And so you're wanting to play her off the back foot. What's your thinking there? And what is it like? How are you trying to read length out of the hand?
Yeah, my thinking is, it's my strength against spin is to play off the back foot. And I also feel like on big turning wickets, you allow yourself more time to let the ball to spin, especially if it's turning away as a right-hand batter. And then, sorry, what was the next part of the question?
In terms of trying to read length out of the hand, what cues are you sort of looking for?
Yeah, so I do tend to be a little bit lower in my stance to the spinners to be able to get a gauge if the ball's gone above my eyes. And not on that day, but if it does go above my eyes, I'm usually willing to use my feet. But when the ball's turning away big, it's more just whether I'm really getting forward on the front foot or really getting back. So we talk about not getting stuck on the crease. So even though I'm not leaving the crease, I'm getting a big stride forward or a big stride back to just create that depth and being able to, I guess, smother the spin or just get closer to the ball to prevent it from spinning. So, yeah, when I do it well, which is not always, that's, getting low and seeing the ball, whether it's above my eyes or not, and then being able to react quickly. That's probably a work on that I've been working on back home, is actually being able to push a bit more off both feet and not getting too crease bound when I'm not using my feet and leaving the crease. So, yeah, still lots of work on.
Awesome. It's a great mentality to have. I mean, yeah, as you say, even at your age, still looking for ways to improve. And I can only assume that's what keeps you coming back for more, right? The idea that there's always something else to nail.
Yeah, yeah, I just feel like that's the beauty of the game is you've never mastered it. It has a really good way of humbling you. You can score 100 one day and first ball the next day, and every game is a new challenge. And that's why I love it so much, because you're sort of every game, ever since I was young, you're going out there to test yourself physically and mentally, and there's so many uncontrollables, and it's being able to just play what's in front of you on that day, and it doesn't matter how many games you've played. There's always new things that pop up.
I want to touch on one more aspect to the innings you've talked about last week against Sophie Eccleston, ball turning away. I'm also interested in, you talked about ideally wanting to play off the back foot, which can be tricky in terms of, I guess you're always concerned that maybe one shoots through a little bit lower. So in terms of trying to open up scoring options, where are you looking at starting in terms of your guard? Because the ball's turning so much away, are you trying to get closer to off stump to cover that line? Or because you're looking to play off the back foot, are you maybe looking to start on leg stump potentially and give yourself a little bit more room so that when she does miss her length, you can have a little bit more width to cut?
That's a great question, because on that day, and often against leg spin or left armers, I like to bat on leg stump. So if they bowl straight, I feel like I've got almost a ready-made sweep on that line, or a shot into the leg side. And if they bowl on the stumps, I feel like I've got width to hit with the spin to often the cover sweeper out. On that day, I started on leg stump with the aim to either get forward and hit into cover sweeper or get on the back foot, and give myself a bit of room. But she bowled one that sort of landed on leg stump and hit me on my back leg, and I felt like I was exposing my off stump with the ball turning that much. So I actually went further over to sort of like toes over middle stump, but not quite on off stump, because I didn't want to. She's got a good arm ball, so I sort of wanted to be in a position to play that. So yeah, that's the nature of, I guess, playing for so long. I have ideas in my head, but often I have to be able to change them when I'm out in the middle if that's not working. And actually after the game, the coach, the batting coach said, okay, if we needed to score 5 or 6s off her on another day, what would your options be? And we talked about reverse sweeping hard with the spin, and then actually just trying to give yourself, clear your front leg and just swing hard and sort of slap it through the offside. So although I didn't do that on that day, we kind of talked about, okay, what if you needed to score 5, 6s off her on that wicket, what were your options? So yeah, it's always learning, and I think the reverse sweep probably would have been one of the most low risk options. There was a slip there, but I felt like I'd give it a hard enough hit that it'd be unlucky to get caught there.
And so with that, actually, if you were looking to play the reverse, would that alter your guard? Would you look to change your guard as a result?
Yeah, I feel like I would have got closer to off stump with that, just because I am better when I'm in line, my head's in line with the ball. So I often play it to the off spinners because it's always coming back into me. And when the ball is turning away, I feel like I end up chasing it. So I want to get closer to the ball when I'm playing it. And then it's just making sure you watch the ball right onto the bat. I think it's the most least technical shot. It's actually about watching the ball onto the bat and making sure you get something on it.
Brilliant. That's awesome insight, Suzie. Thank you. I mean, I think, yeah, it's easy just to have a conversation with somebody and talk about, things that are quite top line sort of top line insight. But, going into a battle that you're in, genuine contest, you're obviously not keen to give her your wicket from a personal perspective, but also from the perspective of the team. It's really crucial that you find a way to potentially face as much of her as possible, and also just find a way to nullify that threat. So, those as we've alluded to, those are some of the beauties of the game that maybe some of those who aren't so well versed in the game can't necessarily see from the outside. But when you're in the heat of the battle, right, it's what makes the game so good. Uh, I'm interested now in your general sort of preparation or routine. If you're, say, heading into a series or a tournament, could be potentially in foreign conditions. Do you have sort of like a blueprint as such that you've, sort of discovered over the years brings out the best in you?
Yeah, I think what I've learned as a cricketer, if you get too rigid with your routine, it can create a bit of anxiety if, for whatever reason, you can't fulfill that routine. So I've learned to be a little bit more flexible as I've got older, in terms of you don't know what necessarily you're going to get at training and things like that. But I feel like whether I'm going into a domestic match or an international match, it is around getting as much information as I can. If it's the day before, if it's the week before, depending on when we're playing, but around the ground, around how I think it might play. And then I sort of always like to have a bit of a volume hit. I do like to hit a lot of balls, which sometimes when you're away on tour with a team, you don't quite, you might only get a 20, 30-minute slot. So it's trying to be really precise with that, and sort of just checking off a couple of technical things that are always important to me. Checking off probably just my ball by ball routine in training, just making sure I've done, a net session where it's just about my process. And then the day before the game, as best as I can, I like to go to the coach, okay, outswing bowler, Kate Cross, can you bowl a bit of outswing, fields third man square leg, and sort of practice and think about my options. That's probably more so for 20 over cricket. Yeah, and try and get a left arm spinner if there is one, if that's what I'm going to face, and kind of check off my plans of how I want to play them the next day. And if, you don't have all, I guess, the access to those types of things, looking at footage and simply just writing each bowler down and sort of batting on leg stump, I'm going to look to play these shots, and just having a little bit of a mini plan beforehand, and that kind of just clears my mind. And when I go out there, then I'm like, this is what I'm doing, and I don't have to think about it. So yeah, as best as I can, I try and stick to that kind of volume and checking in with my technique, a little bit of mental process, and then trying to face the bowlers, whether that's physically or just in my head, the matchup.
Awesome. Great depth. When it comes to, you touched on your mental routine. Are you able to go into any depth there in terms of the process that you work through?
Yep. I feel like when I was younger, I had no routine. And the longer you play cricket, like some days, I always get nervous before batting. Like if I'm not nervous, I think that's when I know I'll retire. And I like to say I'm not nervous, I'm excited, but there's nerves. And I used to just, if I was really nervous one day, that was just unlucky and did nothing to kind of deal with it. But I can probably go into a lot of depth, but I feel there was a phase when I came back from injury for whatever reason. I did my shoulders out for 9 months, and we played England a series, and I was the most nervous I've ever been as a batter, and I struggled to get a score, and I was sort of doubting whether I still had the ability to play international. And was trying to work through it with the mental skills coach, but I just needed a more rigid routine to kind of deal with the extra nerves I was having. And it started on the morning, like waking up, making sure I wrote in my journal whatever I was feeling, did a little bit of gratitude, and then did 10 minutes of Headspace app, which was just like a 10-minute meditation, which sometimes I was nowhere and wasn't actually doing it, but I just made a rule to do it. And then getting to the ground, I sort of always have a routine of making sure I hit balls, etc. And now every time before I go out to bat, I actually sit somewhere quiet and just sort of sit and breathe. Yeah, whether it's away from people, I'm able to find a space usually. And then when I go out to bat, I have a ball by ball routine. that I sometimes have to check in with, but it's been there for a while now. But I feel like that bit's okay because I've got a routine. It was like beforehand, thinking time before a game. And when we played a lot of 2020 matches and say they were at 7 o'clock at night, just too much time in the day to think about it. So developing a routine before I actually got to the ground as well, just to handle some of those pre-game nerves. And yeah, I feel like that's been the most important part of my game in the last few years, is being really consistent with that and playing in a lot of big matches. Yeah, it's kind of amazed me how well you can manage your mind. And if you don't get it right, it can, take over.
That's great. I'm keen to dive in a little bit deeper if I can. I got a few more questions there. So you talked about sort of getting your thoughts down on paper, sort of journaling almost. What are you trying to achieve by doing that? And what is it that you're actually doing?
Yeah, I feel like some days if you wake up and you're nervous and you can spiral into a negative, I guess, frame of mind around what might happen, or the fear of, I guess, not performing, or the fear of the team not doing well. And instead of just letting that spiral, it was kind of a way of just getting it on paper so it was like out of the system. And that's when I was probably in that more anxious phase. Whereas now it's kind of, I wake up and it might be a really positive thought that I've sort of naturally had, that then I want to almost like manifest. So like it depends the sort of day. It's just going, oh, this is where I'm at, and kind of it's almost like getting it out of the system and either tapping into that or like really trying to flush it.
Brilliant. So two things also of interest. You touched on using a Headspace app, and then also the breathing before you go out to bat in a quieter space. So are you trying to achieve similar things by doing that?
Yeah, I think on the day of a game, it's probably before I leave the ground, when I feel like those butterflies setting in. It's just trying to manage that. And I think it's also setting me up for the game, just to remind myself of that breathing and slowing things down. So yeah, I feel like the one at the game, and but this particularly just before I bat, and luckily as an opener, I always know when I'm going out to bat. But it's just making sure that my mind is clear. So I guess it's, both reasons are the same. I probably do it a little bit longer before I go to the ground because I have that time, and it's sort of just a reset of the mind for the day. And then before I go out to bat, and especially if we've fielded first as well, when I used to captain, my brain was kind of like, oh, I shouldn't have bowled that bowler, maybe I should have done this. And when you go out to bat, none of that is helpful. So it was kind of like a reset of, we'll deal with that later. Otherwise you could just sort of spiral into go out to bed and still be thinking about the last over you stuffed up.
So you mentioned trying to clear your mind, trying to clear your head. So what's your thinking in and around that, and why is that important for you?
Yeah, I feel like when I bat my best, and this is the ultimate goal every game, it is when you're not thinking at all and you're tapping into all your instincts, all the experience I have, and I'm just reacting to every single ball that is thrown at me with pure instinct. And like I said, that's the ideal world, but that is kind of the goal of the meditating and breathing, to stop me from thinking and trusting everything that's there, to just be able to react in the middle under pressure. So that's the goal, but I haven't nailed that. So
Of course, it's a massive challenge, right? Massive challenge. If we could find the zone all the time, it would be an easy game. And as you've touched on, it's far from that. So you've kind of tapped into your process mentally. I'm keen to understand, like, what are the challenges that you're facing every ball? Like, if we think about a teenager, they're dealing with all the stuff that's going on outside of cricket. They might have exams and they're a little bit tired because they're studying and taking on a lot of information. might not be sleeping so well. So, is it a matter of like trying not to have any other thought as the bowler's running in so that you can just focus on the ball? And if so, like, how do you actually achieve that?
Yeah, I haven't figured that one out completely, but yeah, it is around, I think, being able to just stay present with what matters in that moment. And look, if we all could do that in life and in cricket, that would be great. But that's, I think, what I love about cricket is it's sort of teaching you really important life skills, that what matters is the next ball, nothing else. So being able to be present with that ball and react to it the best you can, and then move on and deal with the next ball. And I think the challenge in cricket, unlike basketball, which I had experience in, is you have a lot of time where you're not proactively moving or engaged in the activity. So whether it's in the field or waiting for the ball, you have a lot of thinking time. So it's, how best, and people are different. Like, I know people get out to bed and that's their happy place and they probably don't think at all. And some people sing songs in their head, and there's so many different techniques, but I think it's all about just being present for that next ball and moving on from the last, whether it was good or bad. I think the number of times where I've hit a 4 and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm feeling great, and you take the good stuff into the next ball rather than treating it as a separate event. And I think on the back of that, what I've found the most important skill is the resilience of being able to get up the next day after the team's performed badly or you've performed badly, and being able to have that mental resilience to go again and stay really positive with what you're doing, because I think so often a bad performance can lead to another one. You can get in this cycle, but I think the people who can bounce back from failure is the best in cricket, are the most successful over a long period of time.
Awesome. Thanks for being vulnerable and going deeper into that stuff, because I know, there's a lot of people who probably aren't too keen to share that, so I appreciate it. On to happier memories in general. Your career highlight, what would that be?
Easy. It just happened last year, the 2020 World Cup win. Yeah, I think just that moment of winning and sharing it with some of my best mates that I've played a lot of cricket with, and we've not been able to win a World Cup in all my career, and to finally do that and be a world champion, it's something I'll never forget. And it was something that I felt like was slipping away a little bit. Early on in my career, I was in a few finals, but hadn't been recently, so that's definitely the highlight. An easy one, be hard to beat. Unless we win the 50 over World Cup too, then it'll be double memories.
And so what was behind that enjoyment and that emotion for you? Was it the years of not achieving that? Were there other things in your mind as well?
Yeah, there was, I guess throughout my career, early on, we had 3 opportunities, and I felt like I didn't perform in those finals and was really hard on myself at such a young age, but I had high expectations, and I took that really hard when I was younger. And then captaining the side and feeling like every World Cup that I was going to and leading the team, we had a really good chance, and not quite being able to achieve that goal as a captain. And I guess you reflect a lot on everything and the decision you make as a captain. So there's a little bit of heartache involved in not achieving that as a leader, and then deciding to kind of move on from the captaincy. And I've always loved the game, but to really find my joy again. And I feel like the last 3 or 4 years in particular, with a really young group and still having the opportunity to be involved, like, I've never enjoyed my cricket so much. So although we'd lost, everyone talked about, I think we'd lost 10 in a row, I was still enjoying my cricket. And the journey, and knowing that what we were doing was right. So for us to kind of put it all together when it really counted and our backs were against the wall, I think just as a Kiwi and being part of that White Ferns team, there was just so much to it for Sophie and I in particular, who'd been, I guess, through a lot of the ups and downs, and so it was just everything, and not knowing, I feel like after every pinnacle event, I'm not sure, where I'm going to go, sort of get to that pinnacle event and reassess. So it could have been my last. I try not to think too far ahead, and so it was just absolute joy that we'd finally achieved what we'd been trying to do for 20 years.
And so with that, has there been an edge sort of taken off from a positive perspective? In essence, like a weight on your shoulders to get the monkey off the back as such? Are you able to approach, tournaments or even just generally playing for your country in a slightly different way now because you feel as though, you've achieved that big goal?
I do. Well, I think it's kind of going to contradict what you just said, but I feel like I went into that World Cup, and I feel like World Cups before that, I just put so much pressure on myself to perform. And it wasn't that I didn't want to perform. I just felt like I was in a different headspace. Like, we had a team philosophy, a team game plan, how I needed to play in that role. It was around what the team needed me to do. And I just felt like the focus had shifted internally away from, me needing to perform to like doing my role and doing the role for the team. And everyone tries to achieve that, but I feel like looking back in World Cups, I had put so much pressure on myself to score runs. So that was slightly different. So I think going into the 50 over World Cup, it's funny because everyone sort of said, "Oh, don't you want to end on that note?" And I sort of had this feeling of, no, I want to feel that moment again. And it's just driven me to want to win a World Cup again because I've actually had that feeling, and it's awesome. And we've got a 50 over World Cup in October, so it felt like it wasn't too far around the corner. And I know when I still want to go to training and I'm still wanting to get better, that I've still got some left in the tank. So until that happens, I think, once you get to a World Cup, though, there's always that extra edge. But I do feel, knowing that I'm going to end my career as a world champion is a big monkey off the back. But a 50 over world champion as well would be the icing on the cake.
I love it. Actually reminds me, I know, well, I've listened on podcasts that you're a big Michael Jordan fan. I've watched The Last Dance 10 plus times. I just throw that on whenever possible. He always talked about, very shortly after winning a championship, he was always on to the next one, and it sounds like you're in a similar mindset. So that's exciting for New Zealand fans coming up.
Yeah, and it was like, it's not straight away, but I think because it's so soon, had it been 2 or 3 years, slightly different. And I think the belief I have in the group and the players coming through and the coaching staff, like, I believe we've got probably a better 50 over team and a 20 over team the way we set up. So it made me excited, and I do think we've kept pretty much the same group. They've got that belief from performing at World Cups. So it's just that real excitement that we can do it back to back, and it's going to be tough. We know that, but that's sort of, Michael Jordan has always been a bit of an inspiration. So that's why I've got the number 23 on my back. But I only wear it for New Zealand because I was young when I chose that number.
Love it. So now going to ask you to choose an innings you're most proud of and why.
It's hard to, I guess, look back so far. It's funny, but I feel like whenever I've been through a bit of a lean run and haven't scored runs, every innings that I do is always a really proud moment, because I know I've been in a little bit of a rut and I've managed to dig deep and get myself out of that. So that, just internally, I'm always really proud of the way I bounce back. It's weird, but, and probably because it's recent, but the first game of the World Cup against India, I obviously opened the batting and we batted first, and I faced the first ball, and I I just knew, like, without putting too much on it, how important our start was in that game and in that tournament. And I just knew we had to start well. I was like, we have to start well, and I set the tone. So although I only ended up getting 30 odd, I just feel like that was the start of our World Cup, and I set the tone how I wanted to. So it was probably the first ball of that innings, and the way I was able to, put pressure on myself, that was important, but then still deliver on that stage. And it wasn't a game-winning score, but it was more about the tone I set for the group for that really important game.
Awesome. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but if there's anything you haven't mentioned, please feel free to talk about it. So what is it about batting that keeps bringing you back for more?
I don't know. It's just like when you're out there and all you're thinking about is the next ball, and you play shots that you practice in the nets, or sometimes now I'm like, oh, that's the best shot of my career. And it's probably a slight exaggeration, but I don't know. It is hard to explain to people that don't love batting, but it is literally my favorite place. So when I get out, I really don't like it. But yeah, I guess to be able to go out there and bat, and if you don't get out, you can bat for a long time. It's just so enjoyable to win each battle, scoring runs, hitting boundaries. There's no better feeling. And I think what keeps getting me back is I know when I'm at my best, I can be really good. So it's like that. It's a bit like golf. When you play one good shot, you're like, oh, I could be quite good at this. So I just know once I stop doing it, I'm going to miss that the most, is being out the middle with the bat, constructing an innings. So like it's kind of just the gratitude piece of like I feel so lucky to still be able to do it at this level. And yeah, I know once I don't get to do it, I'm going to miss it more than anything. You can't replace it with anything else, I don't think. You can try golf, but it's just not the same.
You've got me thinking about something that's been on my mind for a while. Like, we're a similar age. I am slightly older than you, but I feel like at the age of me now, 38, I feel like you eventually get to the point where maybe even through your 20s, you're still working so much out, right? You're trying to understand your technique. You're trying to understand your strengths and weaknesses. You're trying to understand conditions and how best to play and batting plans in those conditions. I feel like into your 30s and beyond, you're finally at the point where hopefully emotionally you're in a better place, where you're not so controlled by the nerves, by the anxiety or the sense of pressure to perform, to live up to expectations, all that stuff. I feel like you're finally in a place where your game realistically is as good as it's going to be. So is there an aspect of you feel like of any stage in your career, you've worked out as much as you're possibly going to work out, and now it's time to sort of cash in on all those times when maybe it wasn't going so well?
Yeah, I think that every time. And so then when I don't get a performance, I'm like, oh, what's going on? I've got everything sorted out. But yeah, you're exactly right. I feel really fortunate because a lot of players that I played with in the female game at sort of 28 had to give the game away because financially they couldn't support themselves. And like you say, in your 30s, I think you can really peak as a batter because you've got a better perspective on life. You've played in lots of conditions. You've just got that whole bag of, I guess, experience in different conditions. And so all of a sudden, in your 30s, you just have this bag of knowledge that just helps out in the middle. So yeah, it's funny, like you almost feel like as you get older, you can get better and better. So it's like an interesting phase because, yeah, I know I won't be doing it forever, but I feel like, yeah, I go out to bat 50 over cricket and it's just allowing myself to play, and it's so enjoyable because you sort of know what you're doing, you trust yourself. You don't need other people to give you confidence, or you don't need a coach to be telling you what to do. It's all there, and it's just finding the way to trust in that, and that's the most enjoyable part.
Like what I'm hearing, Suzie, I reckon you've got at least till you're in 40.
Yeah, just one day at a time.
Hey, look, finally, we've talked about a lot of nuggets that should be really useful to aspiring young players, but if you had some advice for teenagers aspiring to have a long career as a batsman, batswoman, what would it be?
Yeah, there'd be a lot, I guess, that I wish I knew at that age. But I think if I could sort of get it down to 3 things, because I feel like that's a good number, it would literally be like ask questions of coaches, of older players, just ask lots of questions and, take little snippets. You might not take everything, but you can learn a lot before you have to learn from your mistakes. You can actually learn from other people's mistakes if you're willing to ask and listen. It'll make cricket a lot better if you're learning from other people's mistakes, not just your own. And I would just encourage any young player to tap into some form of mental skills as early as possible. Whatever that is, I think talking about the mental game, being able to be vulnerable, dealing with coaches or teammates, and actually being able to work on your mental skills, whether it's with a provider, whether it's doing on your own, and whatever works for you. Like there's no set concrete mental skills work on, but I think it's just being open to that and not being afraid to tap into that. Don't wait for something to go wrong before you tap into the mental skills. And then just around routines, it's like it's being consistent but finding what works for you. And I think when you're consistent with your routine and you prepare the same way and you do all those little things, that once you get out in the middle, you stand there and you go, I've done everything I can to prepare for this game, and what will be will be. And I feel like if you are consistent with your routines, you can have that clarity. So yeah, those are 3 things that I think I've learned along the way and probably wish I knew when I was younger, but I've learnt finally, and yeah, those are 3 things that I really try and stick to.
Suzie, I honestly can't thank you enough. This has been awesome.
Great. I love chatting about batting, so.
Suzie Bates, New Zealand women's cricketer, 177 women's T20Is, most runs in the history of women's T20 internationals, 171 women's one-day internationals, second most hundreds in women's one-day internationals with 13, and the 3rd highest runs of all time. She's already a legend of the game, and she's still going. Suzie joined the Elly's Batting Mentality podcast to talk about the one shot she learned in backyard cricket that kick-started her international career, her love of scoring hundreds, the technical change that helped her win Player of the Tournament at the 2013 Cricket World Cup, her mental routine, and how she's learned the hard way about being too rigid with it, her career highlight, and 3 tips for aspiring batsmen and women. We started the interview by talking about our favourite coach, Mike Shrimpton.